Hey there, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, Jamaal Bowman loses a closely watched primary in New York.
Meanwhile, Oklahoma's Christian charter school is blocked in court.
And the Surgeon General issues a health crisis for guns. Well, we begin with a major shakeup in New York's 16th congressional district as far-left Democrat Jamaal Bowman lost to his more centrist challenger yesterday. The loss is largely being blamed on Bowman's anti-Israel stance following the October 7th terror attack, which alienated his largely Jewish population in his district. He also made rather controversial statements about the attack itself, claiming that reports of rape and other atrocities committed by Hamas, well, he said those were just Israeli propaganda.
And there was propaganda used at the beginning of this siege. There's still no evidence of beheading babies or raped women, but they still keep using that lie. Propaganda. Yes.
His opponent, a man by the name of George Latimer, he ran on a more moderate pro-Israel message. He was leading Bowman by 10 points when the election was called last night.
We have to look at the arguments of the far right and the far left and say, you cannot destroy this country with your rhetoric and your arguments. We have to have unity all across that continuum. And if you hold a strong belief, you still must work with other people who don't share that belief, because America hangs in the balance.
But last night wasn't a total loss for progressives. Bowman's fellow New York Democrat, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she easily defeated her more moderate challenger as she now heads for a fourth term in Congress. Meanwhile, on the Republican side of things, conservative firebrand Lauren Boebert won the GOP primary to replace outgoing Congressman Ken Buck in Colorado's 4th district.
Patriots! 2024 is when we take Colorado back. It's when we take our nation back, and we set a path on a new trajectory for conservative values, for Christian morals.
Boebert switched districts last year, possibly to avoid a tough re-election following her theater scandal last fall. Boebert, for her part, said she simply needed a fresh start following her divorce.
Meanwhile, pre-debate tensions are heating up as former President Trump and President Biden get ready to face each other on Thursday. Yesterday, the former president posted on Truth Social that he wants a drug test for Biden. Since 2020, Republicans have been accusing Joe Biden of using performance-enhancing drugs to stay mentally alert.
I just want to debate this guy, but and I'm going to demand a drug test too, by the way. I am. No, I really am. I don't want him coming in like the State of the Union. He was high as a kite. I said, is that Joe up there? A beautiful row? And by the end of the evening, he's like, well, it was exhausted, right?
The Biden campaign vehemently rejects these accusations. Here's spokesperson Adrienne Elrod's reaction to Trump.
I mean, I don't even really know what to say about that. I worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign. She also debated him very effectively. He accused her of being on drugs.
The Biden campaign co-chairman Mitch Landrieu added that Trump couldn't even remember the name of his own doctor when he was criticizing Biden's mental state. Of course, this all comes as more and more voters question whether Biden could last another 4 years with his waning mental capacities.
And turning now to some cultural issues, we go to FISM's Ian Patrick for a look at how the Biden administration has been pushing some rather controversial policies.
Well, as I'm sure we're all well aware, the month of June is often celebrated by people in the LGBT community as Pride Month. Now, while this month, and by extension the celebration of any type of pride, is certainly controversial, the Biden administration continues to throw its weight behind this specific agenda. For instance, tonight, First Lady Jill Biden is expected to host a Pride Month celebration on the South Lawn of the White House. The administration held a similar event last year as well to show solidarity with the community, but President Biden and his entire administration also continue to advance LGBT policies and agendas through politics and have been very active on this as of late. One of the most controversial topics that the Biden administration supports is allowing children and teenagers to undergo transgender surgeries. There's perhaps no greater supporter of this within the administration than Admiral Rachel Levine, who is the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health in the U.S. Health Department and who is a biological male. According to a recently unsealed report, Levine had been in fairly constant contact with the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, otherwise known as WPATH. This organization typically comes up with guidelines they recommend to various governments regarding transgender procedures. Now, this report that I mentioned earlier comes from Canadian sex researcher James Cantor, which shows that Levine was instrumental in rushing development and issuance of the most recent set of guidelines. But Levine was also instrumental in policy construction, or at least trying to do so. According to the report's wording, Levine, quote, pressured WPATH to remove recommended minimum ages for medical transition treatments in this new set of guidelines. The reason for doing so? Apparently a minimum age, which was at least 18 years at that time, would result in devastating legislation for trans care, especially for those under 18 years of age in the United States. And that's me quoting from the report there. But Biden himself has also been rather busy supporting the LGBT community. He recently issued 3 veto threats against Republican-led appropriations bills, which are currently in the House. These bills aim to make budget cuts in the State Department, Department of Defense, and Department of Homeland Security. Biden gave a multitude of reasons as to why he would veto those bills, which includes his claim that all of these budget cuts will eventually threaten the LGBT community as a whole. But Republicans have been consistently claiming that such policies issued by Biden and others in his administration are going so far as to affect our nation's military readiness. In fact, constant promotion of LGBT-like policies in the armed forces have many Republicans pushing back on the issue, claiming that it is affecting recruitment numbers as well as overall preparedness. Most recently, Republicans chided Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks during a DoD Pride event when she said this.
We've heard concerns about policies affecting service members living with HIV and policies focused on the needs of non-binary service members. Please know our commitment is resolute, just as it has been over the past 3.5 years, to continue our progress in full alignment with our focus on readiness and our focus on the well-being of our people, on which our readiness depends.
Many senators said that Hicks and the Biden administration as a whole are focusing on the wrong ideas to promote national security. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks for that report, Ian. Meanwhile, the Democratic National Committee reportedly donated millions of dollars to law firms in legal disputes with former President Donald Trump. According to a new report from the Daily Caller, the DNC has sent roughly $2 million since 2021 to New York law firm Kaplan, Heckler & Fink LLP for legal services. The firm has notably been representing former journalist E. Jean Carroll in her defamation lawsuit against Trump. The DNC first began paying the firm in 2021, 4 years after it was founded. Carroll notably began her suit in 2019, and during that same time, the DNC began paying the law firm Wilmer, Cutler, Pickering, Hale & Dorr LLP, also for alleged legal services. The firm has filed numerous lawsuits and amicus briefs in cases against the Trump administration, as well as the former president. Several former employees of the firm were also given important roles within the Biden administration, including Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas and Ambassador to Mexico Ken Salazar. The new report contradicts previous claims from DNC officials that they do not spend donated funds on legal bills.
And speaking of all the legal issues for the former president in New York, Judge Juan Merchan, he's the man who oversaw Trump's hush money trial in New York. Well, he's now lifting at least part of that gag order against the former president. Trump is now allowed to talk about both the witnesses and the jury involved in that case. And conservative legal expert Jonathan Turley, he says this now opens up for Trump a very important talking point about the case.
One of the things that President Trump has wanted to talk about is the fact that you had people like Colangelo, who came from the Biden Justice Department to effectively lead aspects of this prosecution. And that type of cross-pollination is precisely what has been alleged in this weaponization of the criminal justice system.
Now, as I previously said, the gag order is only partially lifted. It's not completely gone here, as Trump is still not allowed to talk about the prosecutors, their family members, or court personnel, which Turley actually says is pretty odd, considering Trump has already been convicted.
He's preserving a gag order in part long after the jury has left and the verdict has been brought in. That sort of defeats the purpose of gag orders. The idea of gag orders are these navigational beacons that are designed to preserve the fairness of a trial. It's not clear to many of us why he didn't just lift the gag order. I mean, this party's over. He's heading towards sentencing.
Meanwhile, Trump could also be facing yet another gag order in his classified documents case down in Florida. Special counsel Jack Smith is asking the judge in that case to bar Trump from making inflammatory comments about federal law enforcement, specifically the FBI. He's making that request in light of Trump's claim that the FBI was authorized to assassinate him during their raid on Mar-a-Lago because the agents in that case were allowed to use deadly force if necessary, according to standard procedure. All right, and up next, we'll dive into some international news. We'll be right back after this short break.
Do you want to invest in biblically responsible stocks? Financial Issues can help. For only $132 per year, our team of experts will help you make wise decisions with your money and guide you to successful investments that will not dishonor God. You'll also have access to our Portfolio Tracker tool, which will help you keep an eye on your asset allocations, and our Buys and Sells page, which will give you valuable information about biblically responsible stocks. Being a Financial Issues partner is the best way to invest in accordance with biblical values. Make the most of your money by becoming a partner today. Sign up at financialissues.org. That's financialissues.org.
When I took the test, I knew that I had other options. I was really scared. I know that it's really easy to get an abortion in New York. I've been down the other road before, and it really was a negative experience for me. And it felt like I did it because it made things easier for my partner at the time. And this time I thought, I think I want a different story. I'm just really scared. And she said, we'll take it a page at a time. It felt scary, but it felt like a good thing. I'm gonna have to, if I have this baby, I'm gonna have to do it alone, and that's gonna be really challenging. But I wanted to do it. But I knew that I needed help, and to get around people that would help me, not people who would say, this is a problem that we can make go away. More like, this is awesome and we can help you make it more awesome.
Okay, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We begin our segment now down in Israel, where the nation's Supreme Court has officially ended draft exemptions for ultra-Orthodox Jewish seminary students in what is a major shakeup for the country, as these exemptions have actually been in place for Israel since its founding back in 1948. The ruling has already divided lawmakers and could create more headaches for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, which relies on two ultra-Orthodox parties. According to the AP, Israel's Deputy Attorney General has already instructed the government to immediately begin recruiting an additional 3,000 ultra-Orthodox men into the IDF as we speak.
Meanwhile, yesterday, the Iranian-backed terror group Islamic Resistance claimed responsibility for an attack on the Israeli port city of Eilat. In a statement, the group claimed responsibility for a drone missile attack on the city, claiming that they fired upon a vital target. The group also explained that their actions were in revenge for the Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip and what the group alleged were human rights violations committed by the IDF. The announcement comes months after the group claimed responsibility for another missile attack on the city in April. The news follows a statement from Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, who announced earlier this week that Turkey stands in solidarity with Lebanon as the country faces increased tensions between Israel and the Lebanese rebel group Hezbollah.
And turning now to the EU, where a coalition of centrist parties have now agreed to fill the agency's highest 6 government positions, choosing to support yet another term for European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. This comes as the EU is now starting talks with both Ukraine and Moldova over potential membership. Talks are scheduled for Tuesday, next Tuesday that is, in Luxembourg. Belgian officials will represent the European Union, while Moldova's prime minister and Ukraine's deputy prime minister will represent their nations during those talks.
Meanwhile, police in Kenya are the subject of controversy after they opened fire on protesters outside the nation's parliament yesterday. A group of young protesters had gathered in the country's capital of Nairobi to protest proposed tax hikes. After several protesters illegally entered the building and set a fire, the police began to shoot at the crowd with live ammunition. Officials estimate that anywhere from 5 to 10 people were killed, while an additional 30 were wounded. The Kenya National Hospital later confirmed that it was treating at least 45 protesters. The Kenyan parliament later voted to pass the proposed government budget, which included the controversial tax increases. The bill has yet to be signed by Kenyan President William Ruto. The U.S. Embassy in Nairobi condemned the violence, saying, quote, "We regret the tragic loss of life and injury sustained, including by the use of live fire." Yesterday's events followed the deaths of 2 protesters last week, with one of the men reportedly being shot by the police.
And getting some news from our neighbors to the north up in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he is not stepping down even after his Liberal Party suffered a rather disappointing loss last night, where a Conservative candidate won the Toronto-St. Paul special election in the first time since 1988. Here's Trudeau's reaction to that loss.
This was obviously not the result we wanted, but I want to be clear that I hear people's concerns and frustrations. These are not easy times, and it's clear that I and my entire Liberal team have much more work to do to deliver tangible, real progress that Canadians across the country can see and feel.
The victory also marks the very first time Conservatives won the Liberal control of Toronto since 2015. Current polling does suggest that Conservatives are shaping up for a major victory in the next federal election, which must be held by the end of October 2025. All right, we'll dive into some other news after this, but first, let's go to Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. The years following World War I were a pivotal time in American history. The Roaring Twenties, as they were known, the acts of prohibition as well, and the rise of radio and the advent of television made this time period one of substantial formations in American life. So in this episode, let's explore the man who was president over the United States during these important post-war years, in the early years of the brief boom the nation enjoyed before the crash in the 1930s and war again in the 1940s. He was the first American president born after the Civil War and the 29th man to serve as Commander-in-Chief, Warren G. Harding. Now, Harding was born after the Civil War, but only right after, later in the year 1865. He was a rather personable fellow, serving in his local church in Ohio and partaking in other goodwill organizations. In the 1910s, he got into politics in the Republican Party as a popular figure. He served in the Senate for several years, a job that catapulted him into the conversation for Commander-in-Chief. In the 1920 election, he ran on the Republican ticket and won rather handsomely. Now, Harding's calm leadership in the White House was credited to him by many as one of the reasons the nation enjoyed a boom in the 1920s. Now, under Harding, we see the first years of the United States as a true worldwide superpower, even though it had been trending in that direction for many years. In the economic boom coming fresh off the heels of the win in World War I, the U.S. was rising to the top of the world stage. But there were problems under the surface, one of them being rumors of illicit activity among some of the elites in Harding's administration. Now, in an age when corruption on the public stage was a prominent talking point in the American imagination, this turned many voters sour against Harding. The other problem, sadly for Harding, was his health. By 1923, his health had turned downward, and in the summer of 1923, in a trip to the American West, he died of a heart attack, only 2 years into his first term in office. Now, Harding became the 6th president in the nation's history to die in office. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Hi, this is Sheena Bird, the host of Financial Issues. The Financial Issues family is so blessed to have saved tens of thousands of babies, all thanks to the generous support of you, our listeners and viewers. For $140, you can sponsor 5 ultrasounds. Please go to preborn.org, that's preborn.org, or financialissues.org and click on the Preborn logo. Save a baby, save a life.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's start in culture, where the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled that a Catholic charter school is unconstitutional. Last October, the Oklahoma statewide virtual charter school board greenlit the nation's first ever publicly funded religious charter school called the St. Isidore of Seville Virtual Catholic Charter School. That same month, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond filed a lawsuit against a board, saying that the school's partnership with the state could open the door for other state-funded religious schools, including extreme ones. While on the other hand, he said the state could also lose over $1 billion in funding because of a breach of contract.
It could be a satanic temple, it could be any variety of religious instruction that could seek state funding for that. Now, that's the opposite of religious liberty. The likelihood of the Federal Department of Education discontinuing the funding of our public education in Oklahoma is high. It's a risk that I'm unwilling to take.
The court ruled recently that charter schools are public schools. Therefore, the charter school board must revoke its contract with the Catholic school. Drummond celebrated the outcome, saying it's a tremendous victory for religious liberty, saying that taxpayers won't have to worry about funding Sharia law or even Satanism.
Elsewhere, a federal judge yesterday rejected a proposed $30 billion antitrust settlement for credit card companies. This settlement would have had credit card giants Visa and MasterCard paying out while at the same time agreeing to limit and reduce certain fees. The two companies, which, by the way, control a combined 80% of the entire industry, agreed back in March to limit fees charged to retailers who accept their cards. The companies had also agreed to reduce swipe fees and freeze current fee rates for the next 5 years. MasterCard said it was very disappointed by the decision, while retailer groups, they criticized the proposed settlement, claiming that it is only a temporary solution to a much longer-term problem. Retailers currently pay anywhere from 2 to 4% every time a credit card is used at their stores.
Meanwhile, the Surgeon General is issuing a landmark public health crisis on gun violence. Dr. Vivek Murthy says that gun violence doesn't just have physical consequences, it has mental consequences as well.
I am issuing a Surgeon General's advisory on firearm violence. It outlines the urgent threat firearm violence poses to the health and well-being of our country. Beyond these precious lives that are lost to firearm violence, there are wider ripples of harm to those who are injured, who witness the incidents, who live in urban and rural communities where such violence takes place, and who constantly read and hear about firearm violence in the news. The collective trauma and fear that Americans are experiencing is contributing to the mental health challenges that we are facing today.
Murthy says that over half of U.S. adults or their family members have reported firearm-related incidents. These include being injured by guns or witnessing a shooting, and half of teenagers have also reported being afraid of potential shootings at their schools. Basically, the advisory's goal is to implement a form of gun control from a public health perspective. This would include gun violence research, educational programs, and doctors informing visiting patients about gun safety. His policy also encourages lawmakers to enforce universal background checks, ban assault weapons and large capacity magazines for personal use, and implement more mental health care.
And while I'm certainly sure that he is correct about these gun violence incidents having mental health effects, I have seen conservative critics probably rightly suggest there could be a problem with this because, as we saw with COVID-19, if you can justify something as a public health crisis, you can go to some pretty extreme lengths to justify what you're going to do.
Yeah, to me, this definitely seems like just a sneaky way to go around current legislation that doesn't allow for, you know, these gun control measures.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, as they say.
Yep.
Yeah, sadly. Meanwhile, it seems like every day the situation down at the border gets worse and worse, and sadly, today is no exception. Sources are now telling NBC News that DHS has identified over 400 migrants brought to the U.S. by an ISIS-linked smuggling group, and 50 of them are now missing. One former FBI official is calling this clearly alarming. Many were released into the U.S. because they were not on the terror watch list. ICE has arrested about 150 of them so far, but they're scrambling to locate the missing 50. ICE has been arresting people brought into the country by ISIS-related groups for the past several months, especially in light of the recent terror attacks in Russia. Thankfully, no terror threats have been discovered as of yet, but one Biden administration official says they are taking an abundance of caution about this to mitigate potential risks posed by these migrants.
Meanwhile, in some other scientific news, for a change, a Chinese spacecraft brought back the first samples from the far side of the moon. Nature reports that the Chang'e 6 capsule returned to Earth yesterday, carrying up to 2 kilograms of rocks from the moon's oldest basin. The expedition launched on May 3rd, and it touched down on the South Pole Aitken Basin, or the Spa Basin, on June 2nd. Chinese scientists' goal is to find out why the moon's two sides are so different and what the rocks are composed of when they form in a spa basin. China is already planning 2 more trips to the moon in 2026 and 2028, and they will look for water ice, which can be used to make oxygen and rocket fuels, crucial components for a long-term stay on the moon. Space policy researcher Namrata Goswami at Arizona State University said that China will likely establish the first ever permanent presence on the moon, judging by their current timeliness on these projects.
It's a very concerning thought.
Indeed, yes. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And don't forget, you can also follow us on social media at FISM News, or you can download our FISM app. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll catch you tomorrow with our more news coverage.